Anne to her death. Members of the jury, today you heard all of the success that the defendant had to lose, all of the pressure that the defendant was under. And there was only one person standing in the defendant's way of attaining the ultimate goal. There was only one person that could shatter the defendant's hopes and dreams. And that person is dead, the victim of the defendant's actions. That person is Anne Marcus. Today, you heard that the defendant was the last person seen with Anne the night the defendant had been extremely violent towards her, the night of her death. The next day, the defendant was at school unusually early. Anne's locker forced open. The test? Gone. What else was gone? Anne Marcus. Anne Marcus was dead. Suddenly, everything that had previously gone to destroy the defendant's future had all disappeared. Today, we, the state, has proven to you, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the defendant is guilty of committing second-degree murder to Anne Marcus. To prove second-degree murder, the state must prove 1. The victim is dead. Dr. Hobbs testified to the Anne Marcus's death and bodily injuries as mentioned earlier in the testimony. Dr. Hobbs testified to many bodily injuries, such as a laceration in Anne's left temple, a swollen area around Anne's left eye, which matches up with being punched. Her body was in a state of rigor mortis, and she had cuts and bruises. 2. The death was caused by the criminal act of the defendant. Cody Ward and the defendant testified to the defendant cheating and Anne being the one to catch her. Cody Ward testified that on the ride to Galena Beach, which was the defendant's idea to go to, as the defendant said, the defendant was extremely mad and called Anne a backstabber. Once the two had arrived at Galena Beach, the defendant was repeatedly very mean and violent towards Anne. The defendant pushed her, shoved her, and made a lot of very intimidating actions towards her. When the defendant finally returned to the car, she was not only very angry, but she had a spot on her wrist that appeared to be dry blood. The next day, when the officer asked the defendant if she knew Anne, the defendant immediately responded by saying, "I can't believe she hit her head like that." This was something that at this time only 3 people knew: the officer, the coroner, and the person who murdered her. 3. There was an unlawful killing of the victim by an act eminently dangerous to another and demonstrating a depraved mind without regard for human life. Dr. Hobbs testified to the victim Anne Marcus's death and many bodily injuries as mentioned earlier. In addition to the many other wounds, there were ligature marks on both of Anne's wrists. Now, while the defense may try to tell you that these wounds were due to rock climbing, Dr. Hobbs testified that it is highly unlikely for the wounds found on Anne to be from rock climbing. Throughout the entire time of Galena Beach, the defendant was repeatedly very mean and violent towards Anne. The defendant pushed Anne, shoved Anne, punched Anne, hit Anne, and made many other intimidating actions and remarks towards the victim. There was all this violence at the night of her death, and it is Dr. Hobbs' professional conclusion that Anne Marcus was struck in the side of the head, bound, and then thrown into the surf. Members of the jury, although you have seen all of the facts that fill in second-degree murder, there is a lesser charge of manslaughter. However, it is the law to convict the defendant of the highest charge that has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. And that, members of the jury, is second-degree murder. But there is a lesser charge of manslaughter. And let me briefly discuss it with you. Manslaughter is the killing of a human being by the act's procurement culpable negligence without lawful justification. Members of the jury, this is more than just culpable negligence. The defendant had a lot on the line. She was stressed. She was competitive for this scholarship. There was a lot of violence coming from the defendant to Anne the night of her death. And Dr. Hobbs' professional conclusion is that Anne was bound, struck in the side of the head, and thrown into the surf. doctor didn't even see Anne's body. The defense's doctor only saw pictures and tissue samples. Additionally, they have not been in practice in 11 years. But even with all that, the defense's doctor still managed to disagree with every single one of Dr. Howell's conclusions. Now, the prosecutor tells us about a mystery person, but that mystery person did not have a motive. They did not know how the victim died. The defendant did. The other person walking away, the one that the prosecutor thought looked like the defendant, is the person who killed Anne Marcus. Lastly, the defense brought you the person on trial for murder, Beth Martin. The person whose story seemed to conveniently oppose everyone else's and make her look better. The defendant admitted to being aggravated, to saying, "I can't believe she hit her head like that." And she told the Reverend that she had until Tuesday to turn herself in. But the defense is right. The defendant was a conflict resolver. Anne Marcus caught the defendant cheating. So the defendant murdered her. Conflict resolved. So now, members of the jury, we have shown you all the facts that fill in the spaces of second-degree murder, and shown you every single thing that the defendant had to lose. All of those things that Anne Marcus could destroy. Members of the jury, Anne Marcus knew too much and paid for it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.